Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to Vision Chats at Johns Hopkins, where the only thing that matters in the next hour is the future. With me today to talk about all these things are Jeffrey Moss from Parker Dewey, co-founder and CEO of Parker Dewey, Liz Wessel, co-founder and CEO of WayUp, and Keaton Swett, co-founder and CEO of MindSumo. Thank you all three of you for joining us today. How are you doing, first of all? Everybody's doing okay?
Doing well.
Doing well.
Welcome.
Living the dream.
Living the dream is great. I want to welcome all our viewers and our entire audience today. Thank you all so much. Before we jump in, I want to share with you a little bit of where we are this week and how things have been developing over the last couple of months. It's been exactly 179 days since the first reported case of COVID-19 in the world. 114 days since the first reported case of COVID-19 in the United States. According to Johns Hopkins University's tracking system, we are now at 4.3 million cases and close to 300,000 deaths worldwide. And we are close to 1.4 million cases and over 84 people who have lost their lives in the United States due to COVID-19. Before we jump into any conversation about the economy, the impact on jobs, I just want to pause for a second and just acknowledge the tragic moment that we're all experiencing as a humanity in this world. We're now at a point where the likelihood that most of us, that there's a strong likelihood that most of us either have been impacted by COVID-19 directly or know someone who has been, either from a public health perspective or economically. And our thoughts and prayers go to all of those people who are impacted. In addition to a public health crisis, we are also experiencing an economic impact that is profound on humanity and on all of us in our industries, in our work lines. We're now seeing an unemployment of 15% in the United States. The GDP has been reported to have retracted by 4.8% this past quarter. Although the stock market and the housing market are still holding steady, but we are experiencing budget cuts in various industry sectors, in education, private and public enterprise. But also we're seeing lots of paradigm shifts all around us. Online learning is taking off and a lot of us are finding our way through it, practically at every school, K through 12, universities and colleges. 2/3 of Americans are working remotely today. And many are saying that they can't envision themselves going back, that they are not only enjoying work remotely, but also that they are more productive and more effective and more efficient. Many of you have seen that Twitter has just announced that remote work is now forever at their company. And what I can tell you is that in my own departments at Johns Hopkins University, I've made the same announcement before Twitter. I just didn't get the same acknowledgement for it in the news media. But it seems like that is a trend that we are headed now. Tesla is reopening its manufacturing despite the statewide shelter in place. And fall college planning is in full force, and many colleges are struggling to make the decision to open or not, to stay online or be residential. And the latest news is that the California State University, the largest state school system in the country, has announced that it will be online in the fall, versus University of Arizona, which is an example of those universities that have committed to opening fully for a residential experience. So we're about to see lots of models of how this will be done. Keep in mind that we are about to graduate 4 million college students this year in 2020. 2 million of them are with bachelor degrees. And half of them planning to go to graduate school, and about 1/3 of them are graduating without an offer at hand right now. But 5% of these graduating students are facing the real prospect of having already had offers that they've worked hard for that are being revoked today. So there are lots of questions for us to deal with today. Is this a year of loss or opportunity for our college students and for all of us? Should employers focus recruiting at fewer schools, or how do they even choose which school to focus on as they move forward? How do they do business with the universities? How do universities pivot to create recruiting pipelines for their students in the future? And are internships disappearing as we know them because employers don't know how to manage them virtually or don't know how to handle them? So let's start right there and with a conversation about internships, and then we're going to chat about all of these things with Liz, Keaton, and Jeff. So Jeff, I'll start with you for this conversation. What will happen with internships this summer?
Gosh, I don't know. We're in uncharted territory here. I mean, we've never seen anything like this pandemic. What I do know for sure is there will be hiccups. This is not going to be a perfect experience for students or companies by any stretch, and I would say that's okay. I mean, we're talking with tens of thousands of students, and what they're telling us is they recognize this may not be the summer internship experience of their dreams. They recognize they're not going to have all of the happy hours and team building assignments or opportunities that normally take place, and they're okay with that. What they're most interested in is getting real professional experiences throughout the summer, and that's something we tell the companies all the time. Don't stress about making the perfect the enemy of the good. Create as good and as positive of an experience for the students as you can, and they will appreciate that. What we do think will happen, and again, I don't know this for certainty, but what we do think will happen is the companies that had strong internship programs to begin with will evolve and will have a great experience this summer as well. And what I mean by good internship experiences, the ones where the managers aren't feeling like they were babysitting the interns, the ones where the interns were doing more than fetching coffee. A good internship experience is one where students working on real professional assignments and a series of those assignments throughout the summer to give him or her exposure to different parts of a team, different departments, different parts of an organization, while also giving them the opportunity to demonstrate their skills to a company. That can still take place in a remote environment. And that's what, again, we're seeing those thought-leading companies doing. For the companies that have canceled their internship programs, what's been interesting is a lot of them are actually starting to pull them back. They're recognizing that their managers were still relying on interns for certain projects or certain tasks. They're realizing the value of the internship program in the recruit goals and to address the recruiting needs next year. So we're starting to see them explore various creative ways to pull their programs back, even if it won't be 10 weeks, 40 hours a week on site. The last thing is there's a lot of discussion about trying to replicate the experience with virtual happy hours and Zoom-based scavenger hunts. One of our suggestions is don't force these things. If scavenger hunts were going to be part of your internship program already, if that's part of your culture and it's a rah, rah, go team, go, doing it once, having it fun, be tongue-in-cheek is one thing, but don't try to force it. Don't do artificial, and again, Farouk, you said it in the past, throwing remote or virtual in front of an activity doesn't make it appropriate for this environment. The same way you can't just have a virtual career fair and expect it to be just like the prior ones, but on Zoom. Don't expect to have a bunch of virtual happy hours where, again, everyone's sitting on Zoom.
Yeah. I'd love to share, something I'll say on internships this summer that what Jeffrey just shared definitely makes sense and sounds right. And what I'm seeing is probably what everyone is hearing. The companies that have essential interns, by the way, and no one's talking about them, but the companies that have interns that can't go virtual, which by the way, we do have a bunch of clients who have that. They're seeing offers renegged, candidates saying, I don't feel comfortable coming in. So that's one group of companies that are having their own issues as well. They want interns, and interns are not necessarily comfortable, or very often their parents aren't comfortable with them doing it. Then you've got the companies that are shortening their internships, and of course, then there are companies that are canceling them. But what I will say that we've been probably talking to our clients about the most is never before, we've been around for 6 years, have I seen so many companies focused on diversity recruitment as I saw in the last 12 months. It's been an incredible trend and something that WayUp, this is what we do. We help companies recruit qualified diverse talent. And so it's been awesome. But all of a sudden, these companies are now having to rethink how they help diverse candidates. And I'll give you an example and a stat that we learned in a survey, but how they help diverse candidates actually thrive in a virtual environment. 145%, Black and Hispanic candidates are 145% more likely to say that they feel less comfortable in a virtual environment than white candidates. It's when you look at whether Black and Hispanic candidates feel qualified for roles that are virtual, they're 45% less likely to feel qualified than white candidates. And these are all stats that have changed. We've been surveying for a long time. These are stats that are very much as a, kind of in response to COVID. And when you look at reasons why, very often it has to do with socioeconomic status difference. And so a lot of our clients are right now trying to figure out, how do I help, what about candidates with students with disabilities? How do I help my hiring managers understand that my team member, my intern might have to take a lot of their calls from their closet because it might be the only place where their 6 siblings and their parents are not running around in the background or screaming? How do I help my hiring managers understand that not all disabilities you can see on a Zoom? And so that's been something that I, talk about. I'm sure we're going to get into how universities can help. I think that students are going to need a lot of help in terms of how they're asking for feedback and how they're building connections remotely. But I think companies right now are really trying to figure out, how do we give the toolkits to these hiring managers to enable them to help Black and Hispanic or female or disability candidates, veterans, et cetera, feel comfortable and be able to perform.
Yeah, just to follow up on that, Liz. It's really interesting you say that, because we've noticed a really similar trend with our users. We've actually had a lot of companies who have posted challenges on MindSumo specifically related to COVID-19 content, and looking at the difference between where the student comes from, kind of what their background is, family-wise, socioeconomic speaking, and how they are responding to these prompts, these challenges, which are specifically about what COVID-19 has done to their economic and educational prospects. There's a huge gap across, students who come from, a more, stable background where they don't feel the financial pressures. Maybe they have the technology that they need to be able to, kind of continue on with life in a semi-normal way. And so we've noticed the same thing. And I think it's also important to point out, when we talk about what our internships going to look like this summer, it's not just from the student standpoint, how there are these big chasms that exist between students of different backgrounds, but for companies as well. You have kind of an upper tier, this kind of elite sector of companies who have the resources to be able to kind of figure out what they're going to do to mitigate some of the effects of the pandemic. But, we work with a lot of small and medium-sized businesses as well that are just basically trying to focus on how are we going to survive through this. And, kind of revamping their internship program is something which is just going to have to fall by the wayside for them, because there are so many companies out there, thousands and thousands of companies that are struggling just to figure out how are we going to make our existing payroll and kind of get through this economic disruption without going under. And so I think you're seeing, unfortunately, that split because of the pandemic, both within the population, within students, depending on kind of their background and socioeconomic status, but also with companies, the companies that have the resources versus the companies that, operate in maybe an industry with different margins, or just don't have those war chests of cash that they can rely on to get through this. And so that's been something which has been obviously unfortunate to see, but I think it's just important to recognize that thinking through the internship problem for a lot of companies and students is very different depending on where you're coming from. And for a lot of people and companies, unfortunately, it can't even really be front and center for them because they have much more immediate needs that they need to address.
Yeah, I'm really happy, Liz, you brought up the diversity, equity, and inclusion side, because we've actually been hearing some really inspiring stories around it, because the companies and the students are definitely facing all of the challenges you mentioned. But what's nice is, since location has been taken off the table with the fact that the employees and the interns are now remote, there's additional opportunities for the interns to engage with members of the employee community who may come from more similar backgrounds, whether it's them doing a discrete project for an individual from a background that's more comparable to theirs, or even engaging as mentors, whether it's through the ERGs or more directly to get assistance. So we're able to sort of take geography off the table, which I think might be one of the silver linings of this, but it is a huge issue. I mean, when you're talking about individuals who don't have computers they can bring to their house to work remotely, or individuals that may not have the wireless or internet connectivity you need, these are things that everyone on this call probably takes for granted. How do we as organizations make sure that our interns have access to those tools to be successful and able to participate in the remote program?
Exactly, and I think the risk. So first, Liz, a lot of people are applauding your comments and are asking for any report that you might have. And if you have one, feel free to drop it in the chat box. It's below with those requests. So thanks for bringing that up. I'm wondering if there is a risk for these companies to take steps back in their efforts in diversity recruiting. And by the way, recruiting alone is not enough. Once you recruit them, you got to make sure that they're fully integrated in your organization, and that they're supported and thrive in order for them to thrive. But also in their internship programs in general. So is there a risk that these companies might not see the risk for their long-term impact, and might just cut back on these efforts that are too important? Are you seeing that, or are you feeling like they are still prioritizing them even though they're squeezed for dollars and for time and for resources?
I mean, personally speaking, we've definitely seen a cutback across a lot of companies who had kind of planned certain things and initiatives. This is obviously speaking from our point of view with our business. But then as COVID started to ramp up, we noticed a pretty significant pullback from a lot of organizations saying either, we had earmarked money for this, or we had dedicated personnel who were going to be doing this. And then, the email started to come about X number of employees have been furloughed, or we've had to lay off X percentage of our staff, or these dollars have had to be allocated elsewhere. And so I've definitely noticed an impact. I'm not sure if Jeff and Liz have seen the same thing from the companies that they're working with, but at least initially, from the business community, what I've seen, pretty indisputably, almost across the board, at least within March, April. I'd say it's opening up a little bit, but we saw a very quick kind of recoil where people were really, really concerned about what was going to happen, scared of their resources just completely running dry, and saying, not necessarily we're not going to do anything, but we're going to push a pause button on this, and let's see what happens over the next couple of months. Luckily, we are seeing that start to open up again. I would say May has been the first month where some of those companies we were talking to in March have said, okay, we think that we have kind of a strategy to get through this, and we want to continue talking about how we can engage students. And so I'm hopeful that trend's going to continue. But there was certainly a pretty big drop off for us, at least, when we talk about that March and April timeframe.
Liz, you seem to want to jump in.
Yeah. And I just popped the article in the chat if anyone's curious for it. I'll also, after I'm done talking, I'll pull up a video about two diversity recruiting leaders talking about the data and what they're doing, because I thought it was interesting. Okay, so if I were trying to model out and project out my business, which again, we don't charge students or universities ever, all of that's free. We just charge employers to work with us. It would be such a fascinating and difficult model, because I'll share some of the things that are pulling back from budgets and some of the things that are being even more invested. So pulling back, we have clients that are, look at Citigroup. They were, I think, the first ones to do this at scale. We're very proud to call them a partner of ours, but they just flat out said, we're giving offers to every intern who successfully completes the internship. And so they're not going to necessarily need to hire as many people in the fall if their offer acceptance rate is high, which Citi historically has awesome offer acceptance rates because it's a great company to work for. And so a company like that might not be recruiting, might not need to recruit as many in the fall, or maybe their hiring numbers go up. But I think, on one hand, we're seeing that, and on the flip side, what we do is we've always been virtual. So my team at the very beginning was really concerned. I actually posted on LinkedIn about this morning. So I have someone in HR tech who I look up to greatly, and he had told me that in 2008, diversity recruitment numbers, because again, I talk a lot about diversity because that's most of what we do with our clients is diversity recruitment for early career and helping them recruit just like a qualified but diverse audience. And so I apologize if I keep going back to that topic, but he had told me that in 2008, all of the diversity budgets kind of got swept up. Like if a team's budget was cut, D&I was one of the first places. And so I was expecting for that to be the case this time around, but all of a sudden I'm now hearing from companies saying, you know what, we're just going to need to double down on our D&I budget virtually, and most importantly, change how we go about recruiting, because the same process or the same interview process is probably not going to work virtually as it did on campus. You know, you have so many companies who have the luxury of being able to go to, we'll call Johns Hopkins out since you work at Johns Hopkins, who had the luxury last year of going to Johns Hopkins, meeting a bunch of people at a career fair, bringing them into a room, it sounds sketchy, but you know what I mean, bringing them into a room a few hours later and handing them a virtual offer letter a few hours after that because they were impressed. And that's not the way of the world anymore. Now, all of a sudden, the ATS, which used to be an applicant black hole, has to become a priority. And so how companies are thinking about getting qualified but diverse talent into their funnel virtually is now becoming more of a priority than just, I need applicants at the top of my funnel. So we're starting to see a lot of our clients say, it's not just about sourcing, it's also about screening and the process by which we think about hiring these people. So that's been a really fascinating change of pace. But the last thing I'll say on this is Jeffrey, Keaton, and I were all talking at the very beginning with Farouk right before this started about the fact that our business is actually, you know, all kind of, we're betting on companies switching to be more virtual over time. And this pandemic, if we're talking about making lemonade out of lemons, like it's just simply expediting a lot of that. So we've definitely seen some negatives. I mean, some of my favorite client partners, my friends who work there have been laid off. So we're definitely seeing some negatives, but trying to stay positive as well.
Yeah, I'm so happy you brought that up because not the layoff part, but the companies changing. Yeah, I mean, this is what's interesting is DEI is more important now than ever. And what's interesting is the budget that was going to be spent this fall, for instance, on campus recruiting to go stay at hotels and host info sessions and, as we joke around, pay for the chicken skewers and Frisbees can now be redeployed in other ways. And what that means is it can be redeployed to help drive more equitable access for all college students to have opportunities with the companies. This is one of the things we're seeing with micro internships a lot, is that I could go spend 10 or 15 grand to go visit one campus. When you add up the full cost for 10 or 15 grand, I can provide opportunities for 25 or 30 students to actually work on real projects for my company and to see them in action and to build my brand with those students and provide them with equitable pathways into my organization. It actually becomes cost neutral. So in this cost-cutting environment, companies can still find that. But what's more important, and again, Liz, I think you touched on this, is so many of the diversity, equity, and inclusion initiatives have historically been check the box. Let's write a scholarship check. Let's feel like we're doing the right thing by publicly talking about these programs. What we've actually been seeing is over 80% of the students selected for micro internships come from underrepresented backgrounds, which is pretty wonderful. But what we're also seeing come from that is we're able to use this project-based approach to almost quote unquote retrain hiring managers. That the hiring manager that only wanted to interview candidates with a certain academic pedigree or a certain GPA or a certain major, they're having students do real professional assignments for them, and they're not asking where they went to school. And they're not asking about GPA. They just appreciate the immediate support these students can provide. And what it's doing is it's giving a student chances to actually showcase their skills, not just the hard or technical skills, but those core skills like communication, problem solving, grit, adaptability. And it's, again, starting to go through that process of retraining the hiring manager that you don't need a 3.9 in finance to do the job.
And I think it's important too that this is something companies and students need to recognize, that the quote unquote definition of an internship, even maybe the terminology, the lingo that we use to describe that, I think needs to be changing, especially given the circumstance now, because, you know, when a lot of students think, okay, what do I need to do to prepare myself to get a career? That word internship obviously pops into the heads of most people. But I think it's going to be both the companies that are willing to think creatively about how to address this situation and offer opportunities outside of that traditional internship model. And it's also going to be the students that are proactive and really are the self-starters to think, okay, you know, my internship was canceled, or I don't have any internship availability. What can I do instead? Whether that's how can I create projects on my own? How can I look for online projects? How can I, look for platforms that provide, whether it's freelancer work or whatever it is, just any way, kind of going to Jeff's point about, showcasing skills, continuing to upskill and build those credentials, and then being able to use that to combine into a cohesive story about how, even though, traditional opportunities weren't available, they weren't able to go to the, the career fairs, they weren't able to go to the informational sessions, these students were still working and kind of proactively trying to take steps to build the skills that they have and to connect with companies. And, it's unfortunate that more of that burden is going to fall onto students now to be able to think creatively too on how to address that situation. But it's just kind of reality, and something that I hope universities are thinking about as well. And Farouk, would love to hear your thoughts on that at some point in the conversation too.
Well, two things real quickly, though, to build upon your point and a question that came up in the chat. First of all, Duke University, there was a great article a couple of weeks ago about how Duke students are reaching out to companies to, again, essentially create their own internship. And I think that's really, really important. Second, to a point you were bringing up about ways for the universities to get involved, I'd strongly look at any of the university partners on the call to go talk to the folks at Colby College. So Lisa Noble, who's running the Davis Connects program for Colby, what they did is they just reached out to 30,000 of their alumni. They reached out and said, we understand you may not be in a position that you can add another summer intern to your program. You may not be in a position that you can write a massive check, but you probably have some projects on your plate where you can use some help. Would you consider giving those projects to current Colby students who have been impacted by COVID? And what they're doing is they're providing these new pathways in, while at the same time building the relationships between the students and the alumni, which could lead to so many long-term opportunities.
So
if there's one,
go ahead, Liz. Go ahead, please.
Go for it. All I was going to say was, if there's one thing that I can give all employers on this call as a piece of advice, and it's why it's awesome that companies like Parker Dewey and MindSumo are participating in these vision chats, is that GPA requirements are just so unnecessary and outdated, and by the way, biased and discriminatory, and I'll give you data on that in a second. And that if you can look at more things, like emphasizing what their experiences have been in micro internships or side projects. I like to call some of the stuff you can get on MindSumo, it's like a side hustle that helps you with your resume and happens to help you pay your way through college potentially. Same with Parker Dewey. It's awesome. And, when you look at GPA requirements, the average Asian student in a four-year institution, junior year of college, has a 3.3 GPA. The average white student has a 3.2 GPA. The average Black student, 2.8. The average Native American student, 2.8. You see there's a huge disparity. So all of these companies are out there saying, we're struggling with our D&I recruitment. And all of a sudden, when you look at the data, it's like, actually, you're getting plenty of the candidates into your funnel. You don't need another sourcing tool. You really need to focus on what you're qualifying candidates on, what your screening process is, and what you're really prioritizing. And it's things like these micro internships that I hope recruiters will spend a little bit more time focusing on, and less on things like GPA.
And you're hitting the nail on the head. Where as recruiters, we look for signals of who's going to be the right fit for our organization. And with college students, historically, the only signals that existed were academic pedigree, where you went to school, GPA major. They don't work. And as much as companies have tried throwing AI into it, or non-cognitive assessments or video interview, they don't work. The only way to understand if someone's going to be the right fit is to actually build that relationship and mutually assess fit.
Everything that you're talking about directly applies to the other end of the pipeline. There are two ends of the pipeline. We're talking a lot about recruiters and companies and what they could do, and then the the middle of people who help with that. But on the other end, it's the colleges and universities and their practices that also need to be adjusted. So when I hear your comments about the need to rethink the GPA, what I'm hearing is we need to be rethinking credentials and micro-credentialing and what we give the students when they graduate as a certification of the learning and how they've done it. And we are still stuck in credential systems of the past. We need to rethink what is involved in the full student experience. So we only give grades for classes, for example, and then everything else that happens in student life that is equally and perhaps at times even more impactful on their professional and personal development is nowhere to be seen on the transcript, including the internship, by the way, or whatever other immersive experience that is equally impactful. So, for example, at Johns Hopkins, we're trying to really think about immersive experiences, not just internships. So it is student employment, it is studying abroad, it is being engaged in student organizations, it is doing research with faculty or independent research. And by the way, it is also entrepreneurship. And all of these things need to be made clear from the beginning in the admissions process, in the orientation to the university, and they need to be integrated fully into the curricular experience of the student. Otherwise, what you will always end up having in any universities, what I've talked about often, is a class of haves and have-nots. Those who find their way into those immersive experiences, and therefore they can find ways to, even without a credential, still talk about them to employers. And then those who come from underrepresented backgrounds who not only, the GPAs are not representative of all of the learning and how intelligent that they are, but also who might miss out on all of these transformative experiences. So everything that the three of you are talking about is telling me that higher ed is way overdue for a moment of disruption, where we have to really completely change the skin of this game so that we can try to meet the demands of the moment. So the examples that you gave of Colby or earlier, I loved it, of Duke. I mean, I've seen those news articles. Those describe to me audacious moves, audacious initiatives that universities should be taking and to meet the gravity of the moment that we are in right now. And my fear is that the majority of them, majority of us, do not go to that length. We just sort of kind of hang in the circles of doing the same old, and slapping the word virtual to it. So we are called on right now at this important moment to step beyond the boundaries of our own framework and try wild and crazy ideas, just like the three of you have done when you started your own companies.
Yeah, well, I also really think, Farouk, to that point, universities have a lot more power than they may think, because for the employers, I think that universities, you're kind of the gatekeepers to these students in some respects. And if universities change their practices, whether it's through how they're educating students on, the opportunities that they should go for, or how they're even, maybe in this post-COVID world, how they're teaching students that a career path doesn't have to look like I'm going to go get a full-time job at X company. There are other platforms as well, whether it's the Upworks and TopTals of the world and MBO partners, where, people can really make a good living working entirely kind of as a full-time remote freelancer or consultant. If universities take the lead on helping students understand this new world that we're going to be living in, I think it will do a lot to motivate employers to jump on board as well and to adjust their practices in how they recruit students. Because, if universities kind of toe the line and roll out the standard, we're going to do this, but we're just going to virtual career fair it instead of doing, the in-person, I think it's going to be a lot harder for employers to change their practices too. But if the innovation is coming from the universities, who are kind of, the front line, I think that would do a lot to get employers on board as well. And so I think that universities actually really do have more power than they may think in this process, and being able to shape what it's going to look like for students and how they're interacting with employers, as we look at the future.
Yeah, I think that I think the change has to come from both sides. And from a university perspective, there is an assessment tool that a lot of recruiters use, that companies use, that I won't call out their name, but it's a technical assessment tool that decides whether you're qualified in Java or HTML or whatever for that company. And a lot of employers, including many on this chat, use it. And one of our clients was seeing, they had definitely large enough sample size, many thousands of engineering candidates, that they were seeing that they were getting all of these diverse engineers applying for their jobs. And of course, you look at who's getting through their assessment, that technical assessment, and Asian and white candidates were getting through over 50% of the time, and Black and Hispanic candidates getting through less than 20% of the time. And you know, that is not to say one race is more qualified at Java or HTML. So my team dug in and we were like, okay, what the heck is going on? Because we know race has nothing to do with how capable you are of coding, same with gender, et cetera. And when we started to dig in, it turned out that I'm seeing good ideas in the chat, but it actually was that Black and Hispanic candidates were more likely to go to schools that did not teach that assessment in the classroom. MIT is a great example of a school that taught this assessment in the classroom. If you are a software engineering student at MIT, maybe even Johns Hopkins, I'm not aware, but you would learn how to take this assessment. And a lot of these students who went to top universities that just didn't simply have those resources or hadn't prioritized the recruitment process necessarily in their classes, those students were being left behind. And so suddenly it's kind of like when you go back to high school and you think about the SATs, and a lot of the students who do the best in SATs just happen to have a lot of money to pay their tutors to teach them how to take the SATs. It's that's happening all over again. And it's such a shame because it's like, I don't remember the exact stat, but I think it's something like 88% of college students go to college specifically to get a job. There's some amazing stat out there that I know I've seen thrown around a lot. And when you think about the fact that these universities are doing such a great job at giving them a good education, but they're forgetting about necessarily helping them, you know, actually graduate and get a job, it goes, and Farouk, I'm going to speak on behalf of all career service offices, like it was crazy to me when I saw in the NACE stats a couple of weeks ago, I think it was 1 or 2 weeks ago, that a lot of universities are freezing or cutting budgets on career service offices. I'm like, this is the time when you need to show more than ever that your students are going to like go to college and get an outcome financially as well, and to cut budget from a career service perspective blows my mind. So we're doing all we can to help universities, obviously always for free. So if anyone, I've seen a few chats, if anyone wants to reach out to us, we're not a paid partnership or anything, I'll message the link. But I have to say thank you to all the career service offices out there, because what you guys are doing is incredibly important, and I hope your universities catch up with realizing it.
Well, I think you've just made a lot of fans with that comment. So I'll tell you just one thing is, did you know who is emerging as the entity that has the real power now? You're talking about like universities have a lot of power, public employers have a lot of power. Students all of a sudden in this moment are emerging to be extremely powerful, and they are pushing both companies, but certainly universities in ways that I haven't seen higher education be pushed in the past. All of the conversation about whether to open or not in the fall certainly is all about student safety, but it's definitely about whether students are going to come or not, and whether we're going to keep them in our universities or not. Make no mistake about it that there is a dollar value there. You know, like is it the same to go to X university versus to go to Zoom University with that university and still pay the same price tag? And I think that's all of a sudden that you're hearing from all of these high school students who are in the process of committing to colleges, or just committed recently or delaying their commitment, because they're asking themselves that question: is it worth it, or should I go to a less expensive university and still do it online and then potentially transfer? These conversations are happening at board meetings and in admissions offices. And all of a sudden, the moment is forcing all universities to grapple with the fact that students now have power to walk away, to choose other things. And I think I see this personally, as tough as it is, I see it as a good thing for universities, because we've been creatures of tradition for too long, and we have got to transform. The second comment that I'll throw in there is I really appreciate what you said, Liz, about career services and when it needs to be funded. But as somebody who works in the higher ed, I'll just throw my own controversial moment and just say, you know, as tough budget cuts are, and no one likes them, and I know that there is a human factor there that one needs to acknowledge, and I want to start there and just say that there is an impact on people, and something that I take lightly. And by the way, it could happen to any one of us, the four of us in this call, that any one of us could lose the gig that we have. I have found that budget cuts do force organizations to realign and to rethink their mission and their processes and become more efficient, and reassess what they should do in order to move the needle and to be much more vision oriented and much more mission oriented. I have seen that impact, and I think that that might be the impact of this next budget cycle. So I don't, you know, although they are tough, and in principles, I would agree with you that higher education should invest more in career services. What I would say as an insider is not the way that they are done. You know, like if I am responsible for a university, there's no way I'm approving a budget to increase a career services office the way that they have done it for the last 10 years, 20 years, and 30 years. If it's just to hire more career counselors, throw more career fairs and put them virtually, that eventually do not necessarily produce results at scale, then there's no way I'm funding an office like that. I need them first to transform, to rethink their models, based on principles of equity, who gets access to opportunities, to internships, to rethink how they can scale their processes. And then I think if they can really show the value in metrics, not in feelings, but in metrics, in outcomes, then I think absolutely all of us would fight really hard to make sure that those offices are funded. And I know that that people, but that is exactly how I feel.
No, and I agree with you. And one thing to throw out there, and I'm not saying it's the right thing, but career services has historically been the redheaded stepchild of post-secondary education. That the academic departments, again, are generating the research and driving those things. And then you have the revenue generating departments, if you will, like alumni or like giving. Career services sort of sits there. And to your point, Farouk, I think it's an important one. We need to start showing more respect, again, especially when it comes to measuring the outcomes. Students getting jobs, students getting great jobs, employer sat, all of those things are key and they need to be measured, but they also need to be appreciated by the institution, which is unfortunately sometimes where things have fallen down. The second thing I'll say, and I'm happy Liz brought up the SAT, what's interesting about so many of these things is that the best intentions often have unintended consequences. The goal of the SAT, if you look back to the beginning of the College Board, was to create equitable access to college for all high school students. Again, unfortunately evolved. When we look at tearing up the post-secondary institutions and rethinking them, we need to just consider the unintended consequences of potentially doing so. Because the real value of a post-secondary education isn't learning the quote-unquote vocational skills. It's not learning how to code or how to do accounting. The real value is teaching those core skills, the communication, the problem solving, the adaptability, the ability to think. And those are the things we need to make sure don't fall by the wayside as we start questioning the value of traditional post-secondary education. Where we can spend more time and where I think this crisis is going to drive just fundamental improvement is creating better crosswalks for students to careers and making sure students understand how the skills that they're developing in classes that don't sound like job titles, things like philosophy or history, how they translate to the real world. And at the same time, providing employers a better appreciation for those crosswalks. That if you're looking for someone for a marketing role, look beyond the School of Business. Look at the philosophy or history student because they know how to research, communicate, and craft an argument.
Farouk, I struggle with what you said because I hear you completely. I'm talking about the second point that you were making. I hear you completely on like sometimes budget cuts bring out creativity. But but so the three of us are startup CEOs or founders. And so like in the startup world, and if career services is at all reflective of this, then we are screwed. In the startup world, these budget cuts, which basically means VC funding is being, you know, a little bit less giveaway. I hate that to say that, but it's true, and so on. And revenues being drained for a lot of my friends' companies, et cetera. You see all of a sudden that a large percentage of companies are going to die because they're not going to succeed. And then some companies are going to get super creative and are going to thrive. And while I know you from afar and you are insanely creative and have a lot of the skills that I do believe will help you make your organization, career services at Johns Hopkins, certainly thrive, I get concerned for the students that are going to be the collateral damage of the universities where career services is going to have budget cuts, not be able to come up, like not have the time to actually innovate because they're very, you know, their minimal resources are going to unfortunately require them to just spend that time on bureaucracy or paperwork, or whatever it might be. So I wish instead of budget cuts for a lot of these companies, and instead it's more like forcing mechanisms of if by the end of the calendar year, that's like a very short period of time, you haven't done at least the following three things when it comes to innovation. Partnered with outside companies. I mean, I can't tell you enough how many universities we reach out to and they email us and they say things like, fortunately most are like, why would we not partner? It's free and it's cool and it helps their students get jobs. But sometimes they almost are threatened. And it's like this backwards mentality of, for a university career service office to be threatened by LinkedIn or by WayUp or by any company just seems very 1990s, like very outdated. And that's what I wish we were doing. I don't know that budget cuts are necessarily going to get career service offices who are okay to become great. I think it'll just help those who are great to become maybe even better. So I think I struggle with what you said, because in principle it sounds great, but in theory with businesses you often see it means a lot of them are going to die, and that's going to be at the detriment of the students. So that's my thought. But who knows? We'll find out.
And a kind of a quick follow-up question, Farouk, in talking about budget cuts and how, you know, sometimes that budget has to go to other areas of the university. You know, maybe there's opportunity for career services to, you know, partner more closely with other departments within universities. And I'm not sure how that would happen, but, you know, just to share a little anecdote and a little Johns Hopkins shout out, because I'm a Johns Hopkins alum. Really, one of the main reasons, kind of the main ideas for MindSumo even turning into a company in the first place was largely based out of an experience I had as a student at Johns Hopkins, where I was lucky enough in one of my marketing classes, and I think my professor Leslie might actually be on this call. I saw her make a comment earlier, but we were able to do a course, kind of an advertising and promotion course, where they brought in an actual client and we spent the semester working with them. And, you know, we ran the course almost as if we were our own little marketing agency. And when I look back on my college experience, as far as kind of the concrete skills that I learned, you know, the chance to try to conduct myself professionally in a way that was really going to, you know, help prepare me for the real world, so to speak. You know, that's one of those, you know, those just really impactful moments that I point to from my college career and saying, this definitely helped prepare me and this was worthwhile. And it was from that experience that kind of my co-founders and I talked about, you know, is there a way to bring this type of a kind of project experience on a broader scale in a more scalable way to a large portion of students and do it in an online fashion. And so, you know, that wasn't done through the career services department. That was done, you know, with just a regular class that I was taking. And so maybe there are other ways that career services and academic departments can be thinking of how to collaborate to bring those types of opportunities into the actual learning experience. You know, don't just rely on the outside vendors, don't just rely on, you know, career services to have the career fairs, but how can that become a bigger piece of the actual required learning within the university to bring it directly to the student in the classroom, instead of, you know, as an external resource that they're using. So just my little 2 cents and small story about it. And shout out to Hopkins for doing a good job while I was there.
That's good. I wasn't there, but I'll take all the credit. Thank you. Thank you so much. No, I really appreciate it. And it's an interesting time because it's challenging all of us in our own sectors to rethink what we're doing. And, you know, look, universities are going through a tough budget season. Every single university is going through this, and some will feel it at in greater extent. And then there are actually even now articles and stories that are coming out about some of the small private liberal arts colleges that are facing the real possibility and threats of shutting down. But typically, I think what you're seeing is at least a 10% budget reduction at the average university. I think some of them will feel it at the 20 and 30%. That, every single department will have to feel it. And the decisions of where those dollars will have to go needs to be not only a question of where the priority is, but how it's going to be spent is something that I would want every university to think about it, that it shouldn't be just free money. It's probably the way, I think I'm talking about this because I work in an organization at Johns Hopkins that is extremely data driven. Every single thing is connected to data, and that's because of our senior leadership. And I love this, that it's not enough for us to just say, hey, this is what we do. So it's not about engagement data, if you will. It's about outcomes. Like, how did this money lead us, or how did these investments lead us specifically to these outcomes? And for a long time, I think university departments and units, including career services and others, were not really able to quantify their value in a very specific way. We talk in general terms that here are the things that we do, and we think they generate these types of results. But we should be able to account for every single student's outcomes based on our efforts. And what that does is not only restructuring how we collect data, but it requires restructuring our own systems and our own accountability measures. I don't see that across the board. I think that there is a great need for innovation. What I'm hoping is that this budget crisis will force these units to finally do it, because it pushes them outside of their comfort zone. But with that said, I think your point is absolutely well taken, is that the danger is if we do too much of that, that the ones that serve the least privileged will be impacted the most, and therefore those least privileged will be screwed. And I absolutely agree with that.
And if I can do, a plug for all the tech companies out there, who are 3 of whom are on here, but there's a lot of others, all of whom are literally, all they do is just try to solve exactly what we're talking about. Manny from now Northeastern, used to be Rochester, who's a good friend and advisor to our company, and in my opinion, one of the best career service leaders. There are a bunch of you guys out there who are incredible. He had said to me many years ago, when I asked him why we had one career service office say something to us around, like, why would we want to, tell our students about WayUp or LinkedIn or any of those tools? And I went to him and I was like, why would they say that? And he said, the job of a head of career services is to provide the resources and tools to students to help them get the outcome that they want, especially if it's in a profession. Obviously, if it's grad school, that might be slightly different. And when I heard that, I was like, we're a resource, we're a tool. MindSumo is a resource, a tool. Parker Dewey, a resource, a tool. There's so many of us out there. And I just hope that, Farouk, you mentioned, sometimes reducing budget can lead to creativity. And I totally, as I said, agree with that's the goal, certainly, and that it does happen sometimes. And what I hope everyone will realize is that there's like a lot of vendors and tools out there that, if career services starts to just engage with technology and really look out for other partners, I think that you will actually be helped tremendously, and it costs $0. So that's just my 2 cents.
I want to build upon that, because I think it's important. And Liz, you brought it up before with the model of WayUp, and I know Parker Dewey has the same model. I don't know about MindSumo, so Keaton, I'll let you comment on that. But I think all 4 of us here are mission driven. And again, for those of us that have started companies, we did it as a mission first and foremost. And Parker Dewey and WayUp, and as I said, I don't know about MindSumo, we don't charge the schools. We don't charge the students. We are doing this because we are trying to help address the challenges associated with college to career, challenges that existed before the COVID crisis and challenges that will continue to exist after it's done. And there are people out there that want to help. Schools, you don't need to go spend tens of thousands of dollars to help your students. To Farouk's point, even in an environment where costs are getting cut, there are solutions, and there's vendors out there that want to be helpful. And again, it doesn't take a big check to go do it, or in many cases, any check.
Yeah, and you know, to both of your points with this discussion around vendors and tools, you know, for career services, you know, MindSumo is the same way. You know, it doesn't charge the students anything, and whenever we've worked with universities, it's always been without charging them anything. It's more trying to get this into the hands of their students. I think that for us as founders and for us as companies that are trying to make an impact in students' lives, that can be one of the hardest things, is just figuring out how can we get this, you know, into the hands of more students? How can we get more students on our platforms and connect them with these opportunities? And for career services, I think just recognizing that by partnering with us and by making these resources and tools available, it's almost like you are growing your career services team, because our companies are dedicated to that same mission of getting students opportunities and employment and ways to advance themselves in their careers. And, you know, why not partner with organizations that are experts in their own right at doing this, and trying to provide a great offering and a great service to the students, especially when it's not costing the universities anything. So yeah, that's me just kind of echoing and supporting both of what you said.
Absolutely. Listen, in the last couple of minutes that we have, and unfortunately we could not get to every single point on my list or or in the chat. I'd love to know your projections for the future. What does the future look like for you? And perhaps you could describe it in an image, in a phrase, in a sentence, or in a word even. How about you, Liz? You want to start?
Sure. I think that I am not talented enough to say one word. I apologize. But in one sentence, I would say it's one where both universities and companies are rethinking on the company side how they recruit, so that everyone can go through a virtual experience, and hopefully a fair one and a data-driven one, because data is a lot easier to collect on the internet than it is in person. And on the career services side, I hope that universities will start taking them more seriously in terms of integrating them into curriculums and integrating them into being a larger voice in the conversation.
Very good. How about you, Keaton?
For me, this, you know, I think about the saying, I think isn't it something like wisdom is the application of knowledge and experience. I hope that through this ordeal that all of us, you know, around the entire world are going through, we're going to be able to use it to be wise about what kind of changes we make. And we will not squander the opportunity to, not only from this, you know, college recruiting perspective, but even when we look at how we live our lives, you know, what we kind of view as most important in our societies. I hope that we are wise in how we, you know, we take kind of the suffering that has happened, but use it as an opportunity to build something better, and to make sure that, you know, hopefully we come out of this with a better world than when we started. So it's a little bit cliche, but that's my thought.
Okay, very good. And Jeff?
Yeah, I guess I would say everyone wins. And that's one of the things that's been so interesting about this space, that college to career is one of those few places in the entire academic world where you have complete alignment between the stakeholders. College students want to graduate and get great jobs. Companies want to make great hires, great defined as thoughtful, diverse, people that can add value and will stay with the company. And then the universities want to see their students and recent grads succeed. And what's great is this is one of those places where everyone can win by collaborating and thinking about the existing processes and how they can be reformed and retweaked. There are those opportunities for everyone to win. And as we talk about silver linings or making metaphorical lemon out of lemonade, this could be sort of the catalyst that drives us towards this place where everyone wins. I mean, the reason Parker Dewey has a logo of a Venn diagram is we talk about that intersection between the three stakeholder groups. And again, I'm inspired by all of the conversations that are focused on creating these opportunities that benefit all three of the stakeholders.
Fantastic. Well, I'll tell you my vision for the future. I have this image of no dress shoes and no fashion shoes in the future. So I think that the shoe business might go out of business, and we'll all just be in sandals and flip flops and whatever. what's behind that comment, which obviously is humorous, but perhaps there's a little bit of truth to it, is that I think human beings, you make them do anything long enough that it'll, I think, change their behavior and the behaviors of society, and then even just the values, etc. So and we all know that we're no longer reacting and responding to COVID-19. We're having to learn how to coexist with COVID-19, or we're going to be coexisting with COVID-19 for the next 12 months, possibly 2 years. So I see 2-year mark of our entire society changing, the way we shop, the way we entertain ourselves, the way we eat out or eat in, the way we relate to one another, the way we work, the way we learn, the way we teach, etc. And a lot of it is moving to the virtual world. We're learning our way through it, so we're going to get better at online learning, remote work, etc. But also just a lot of what we used to do in the past is just going to look different, and therefore we're going to dress differently and buy different types of cars in the future if we buy cars, and travel differently. So I think that as I envision the future, I think that it's going to be an entirely different experience. And those of us who get there faster, meaning that get adjusted to life with COVID-19, with masks and all and social distancing for a while, we'll get there sooner. And then by 2022, it'll be, hopefully we'll have a vaccine and we'll move on. But by then, our behavior would have changed too much to go back to the way it used to be. So I'm seeing this as a tremendous moment of transformation that involves pain, that involves challenges. But I think our future will be brighter because of it, and our environment will be better because of it, and there will be a lot of good things that I'm looking forward to it. Listen, I just had a blast with the three of you today. Thank you so much, Liz, Keaton, and Jeff.
Thank you.
Yeah, thanks for doing this, Farouk.
I want to thank everybody who joined us today for Vision Chats. And remember, everyone, there is only one certain vision for the future, and it is the one that you create. All right. Have a wonderful day, everyone. Take care.
Take care.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.